you're just joining us, we'll start in about 1 minute. And I'll start with just some general buying time comments that we're launching this cohort beginning the week of June 8th. I think June 9th is the first date. And this is the second of the overview and orientation webinars that we've been hosting. The first was on Tuesday. Albuquerque and Riverside, some of your staff participated in Tuesday's webinar. And then we have 2 more next week, repeat sessions on Tuesday and Thursday as well. If you had any other staff members who you wanted to have join or participate and kind of see what this is all about, we welcome you to sign up for those and free just like today. So we'll make sure you have the links for those. And we're recording today's session as well. So we'll follow up with a link to these slides and to the recording, so you have it to consider. But thanks everybody for joining. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Fabian, and this is a webinar on something that we're really excited about. It is a different approach to our implementation to creating programmatic data that we call program-based business intelligence, and we'll describe what that is and why this cohort approach to implementation is what we think was really relevant and needed in the midst of this environment that we're all experiencing right now. The overall objective is to be able to deliver a data set that is actionable, that you can use quickly, as fast as possible. Communities today who we're talking to and working with, while in the past we have been able to have implementations that take 2 months or 3 months to go through, today's communities need this data as soon as possible. And the second major point is that clearly in the midst of the revenue shortfalls that we're all experiencing, the implementation needs to be affordable. And so that's what we have been developing and road testing in something we've called rapid PBBi, and the cohort is the latest iteration to allow us to provide an economy of scale with multiple participants coming on at the same time, allows us to share the costs and also create a group setting to learn from one another and deliver that data as quickly as possible. So those are the intro comments, and we'll get into some of the details here. With me today, I'm pleased to have 2 members of our team. That's Jackie English on the left in the little box, and on the right-hand side down below. This is the last time that we were all together, actually, in the city of Aurora, Colorado. And Aurora implemented pre-COVID and was inspirational in some of the work we'll talk about today because of their fast pace to develop a program inventory and program costs and really develop an actionable data set that they're using right now, thankfully, within a 1-month period of time, and that was exceptional. But Jackie she came to us from the client side, what we call a super user, which we'll explain what that means, when she worked for the city of Greeley, Colorado, which is north of Denver and just a little bit east of Fort Collins, if you're familiar. Jackie is integral to so many of our projects, working today, in fact, on helping lead the town of Windsor, Colorado, also a northern Colorado community, Denver, Colorado, Ann Arbor, and most recently Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which just started their implementation last week and made it through about 50% of their cost allocation, developing program inventory for 400 or so programs and allocating about 50% of their budget within the period of now just less than 2 weeks, which has been pretty incredible. So Jackie today is going to talk about how the cohort works, and her presentation will follow mine. I'm going to talk about the why for this cohort style of implementation and why we think it's so relevant. And then Eric Keck at the end will talk about, from his perspective, the value proposition and also the various paths that we have for you, including pricing and the the details that are going to be most interesting as well. Eric comes to us having implemented priority-based budgeting, the core methodology behind PBBi, in 2 different cities, the city manager of Inglewood, Colorado, and Post Falls, Idaho, and joined our team in 2018. Eric is a part of every project that we provide, making sure that not only do you develop great data, but that you know how to take action on it and look after the successful cultural aspects of what is ultimately a change initiative, to be sure. I'm going to go ahead and start with the why behind program-based business intelligence and the cohort approach. For those of you who have followed along, we released our 3-point strategy, which focused on, and some of you are participating in this, point number 1, which is being able to forecast and look out towards the various scenarios that are presenting themselves for what could take place in the fall, what might take place in 2021, and really espouse the virtue of scenario planning in your financial forecasting. That is not going to be the focus of today, but that is an effort that we still have ongoing trainings and free 3-month subscriptions to our software to do that financial forecasting. I know City of Riverside has participated, and that's been great. And Ferndale, I believe, is on board, and possibly Mitch and Newington as well. The second component of our 3-point plan was, okay, so no matter what scenario we're actually looking out towards, whether it's a more of a rapid recovery or a long-term series of openings and closings, we're going to need solutions. And program-based business intelligence to us is that background data to drive service level discussions and decisions that we believe are coming up. And that is truly what the focus is of today. There is a third component to our work, which focuses on regional partnerships as local governments look for really creative ways to remain solvent. And that, while that's not the focus of today, we have presented on this and have our YouTube video recordings to get more into that regional approach and program mapping, if that's actually interested. But let's get into point number 2 here, and the importance of developing programmatic data. In our work with GFOA, if you had followed that in March and in April, we laid out various types of scenarios that could unfold, not unlike what the Wall Street Journal or any other channel is focusing on. There was the V-shaped recoveries, which suggested that there's a somewhat of a rapid revenue decline that we've all experienced, that first part of the V, and then followed by some sort of recovery out in the future. There are different types of this V scenario that some are speculating might be a decline and a rebound, followed by another decline and a rebound if we have to go back into any sort of shelter in place. Some organizations even looking at a long-term L, or we've heard it described as a Nike swoosh, where the revenue is just reset to a lower level if we have anything like a long-term depression or recession that follows. And from GFOA's perspective, and our clients have been doing the same, the types of solutions that you deploy to handle this kind of revenue shortfall include what I've captured here in just a couple of very common newspaper headlines, whether it's furloughs, deferring capital, implementing hiring freezes. These are the types of solutions that we've all had to go to because they're accessible, they're fast, and they help deal with the immediacy of decision making that we've all needed. So that's what, I mean, even GFOA has been recommending these types of cash flow, emergency types of solutions to balance the budget. Our realization is that there likely comes a time when these types of solutions run out, and then what? And that's what we've been focusing on, is that the next wave of the decisions that we want you to have at your fingertips and be prepared to deploy are programmatic types of options. We believe in helping you be resourceful, knowing what all of your options are, and to develop information at the program level, what you do, how much it costs, where you could partner, what services actually you still need to provide, Some might need to be provided at a higher level of service, even in the midst of this scenario, which can be temporarily suspended, and so on and so forth, even those that can generate revenue still. The programmatic business intelligence is what we want to equip you with so that you know what you can do if and when you need it. To show you an example, if it's not totally obvious, here's more of the why. This is from one of our organizations and a facilities department for the most part, if you will, so handling all of their building maintenance, custodial programs, and so on. And this is a typical line item budget. And I blew it up on the screen like you see here intentionally, just because, as we all know, the line items are a challenging data set if it were our only data set. The line item data set is really important. It's our go-to to figure out how we're going to balance the budget, but it simply has its limitations. And for the type of revenue shortfalls that we're trying to grapple with, if this is our only data set, we can only perhaps go so far studying each and every line item to figure out how we're going to come up with our most strategic solutions to handling the revenue shortfall. So what we do is translate this information to a program level. So same data, but now translated around what do we actually do? Where do our personnel spend their time? Where are our professional services contracts aligned with a particular program? So if we wanted to study the custodial program and different options that we can provide it, or talk about the impacts of working from home and how that might decrease our level of service needs for custodial services, we want to be able to get to that program and drive that particular discussion here in the tools, breaking it out into our personnel versus non-personnel costs, and then ultimately seeing for any particular program, custodial here as an example, who are the positions that participate in this program and what are the non-personnel costs that we can actually talk about if we're trying to come up with a programmatic opportunity overall. And our point being, if we were in your shoes, we would want this data, programmatic data, to drive our discussions instead of only having the line item data, which again, very important, but it allows us less of a platform to talk about levels of service, program efficiencies, ways that we can change how we're providing those programs overall. Another just kind of basic example, this is a community we're working with, St. Albert, which is near Edmonton, for those of you from Edmonton on the call, producing what you're very familiar with, department level data, but then drilling into their departments, in this case, like a solid waste management department, and being able to see at a program level everything from their recycling program to organics collection to basic trash collection and even public education to understand why does it cost us $1.2 million to do curbside garbage collection, and can we find fuel efficiencies perhaps in how we provide that program, talk about regional partnerships potentially, and even revenue generating solutions. These conversations are far easier at a programmatic level. And I was just talking with St. Albert this morning. They are, for those of you who are larger cities on the call, they have about a $100 million budget overall. So for them, looking at a $7 to $10 million revenue shortfall is substantial. But we went through their programs, program by program, looking for options to deploy solutions within the next 6 months or beyond on an actionability scale, and on a complexity scale, which ones would be easier versus harder. And they are going into their meetings tomorrow focused on $4.5 million of their $10 million shortfall, and another 6.8 that are actionable within the adjacent possible. They're in the somewhat near term. This is what we want to get you to, is what do you offer and where are these programmatic opportunities so that you can deploy any of these that you see on the screen. And our way to get there is through creating layers of data that build upon your line item data. Our thesis and the philosophy of our work is that the line item business intelligence is great, but if we can slip in a program inventory, attach that line item data for program costs, and then learn things like what we call basic program attributes, things that help us describe why we provide a particular program. Is it mandated? Does it recover its costs? Is the demand for this program going up or going down? What about the program's influence on results and outcomes? And especially, what is the program's future direction in this environment? The more data that we can layer on that program inventory, the more insight that you would have to be able to drive the best decisions possible. If you thought about it in terms of if you have to make decisions within the next week or two to balance your budget, then you're most likely going to be depending on your line item business intelligence and getting the most out of it that you possibly can. If you only had a week, yeah, you're going to have to probably resort to furloughs and the immediately accessible solutions that are there. But anything beyond 2 weeks, 30 days, this is where we have been working on how can you get that programmatic data to provide you new insight to drive those decisions. So last thing I'll get into before turning it over to Jackie, a quick crash course on some terms that you're going to hear about. And this is getting in a little bit to the how of how we do our work. But first and foremost, when we say program inventory, what we are describing is a list of each and every one of the programs and services that you provide, down to cemetery management or community events or revenue forecasting or pothole repair. For this organization that I picked, somewhere in the ballpark of 200 programs, maybe to 300, or some communities have upwards of 400 programs overall. We just did East Moline, Illinois. They had around 400 programs. We're trying to get to what are the things that people spend their time doing and how would we describe it? They become the basis for decision-making on, does that program need more resources? Can we provide this program with less resources, or if we provide it differently, where are we going to accomplish those savings? We then move into program costing, which is simply attaching or allocating your line item data to the programs that you provide. So when I was showing St. Albert earlier and drilling into each and every department down to the particular programs they provide, and then seeing how their personnel costs and non-personnel costs are allocated. This is done within the tools, and you can see each and every staff member, how they're allocated. That's how we come up with a total cost and also revenue allocations. So that's a costing step that we want to help get you through. And then third is learning even more about the programs you provide in a program scoring or a program evaluation. Maybe you want to know, is the demand for this program actually increasing? Is it staying flat, or is it decreasing overall? So we can score programs or tag them with information about the nature of how they're being provided. You might want to know, as you're contemplating programmatic decisions, is the program mandated? And how mandated is it? Is there a federal mandate that you're upholding by providing the program, or is there not? Is there a state or provincial level mandate, or is there not? Or is it more something that's self-imposed, something in your own charter or incorporation documents, and so on and so forth? Or does it not meet any of those criteria? And that's really important to know, because that might be a program that's more easily changed rather than something that is helping you uphold a federal mandate overall. And there are additional basic program attributes, and this is yet another component of the implementation, is the more data that we're attaching to that program, the more insight that we can derive. My final section is all of this builds to program insight, just like I was showing for the city of St. Albert and their actionable opportunities list. We have produced something called the Blueprint for Action. Pre-COVID, it went something like this. Hold on one second. Where on the left-hand side is where we need to drive resources to fund things that maybe 3 to 5 years down the road need more resources, new programs that you want to launch, programs that you really want to boost in terms of your investment. Pre-COVID, when we weren't necessarily looking at budget deficits, we were still trying to free up and amass new resources to fund the future. And the way that we would do it is by looking for ways to reallocate your current budget by way of focusing on programs where we can do less or provide more efficiently or source differently overall, or programs that lend themselves to revenue generating opportunities through fees and charges, being a regional in-source solution and providing your programs regionally for additional resources. And while all of this was great in the pre-COVID environment, looking 3 to 5 years down the road, today our clients are looking more 3 to 5 months down the road, and it's less about all the new programs that they want to launch, but how they're going to still balance the equation. And our work overall is to apply a mindset that every program has a future to it, whether that's increasing the program, still providing it on a status quo basis, decreasing it, temporarily suspending it, providing a regional partnership, or even internal consolidation overall is where we're going to try to get you to. So as I turn over to Jackie to talk about the how, the premise for this was, how can we get you something to get through that data, amass that data set as quickly as we possibly could, and as affordably as we could. So Jackie, I will turn over to you to talk about the how.
Thank you, Chris. I, exactly as he said, am going to follow up a bit to talk about, okay, this sounds great, as Chris just talked about. The reasons why we would do this are pretty clear to most organizations, like he said, to build on top of that line item data and to do that using programs as a platform. And so hopefully I'll make clear in the next 20 minutes or so how we propose to do that in a cohort format. And so what this will look like is essentially participating in the cohort has 3 different steps associated. There's first kind of a pre-work step, which will sometimes include just ensuring that the technology works. Zoom can sometimes be hard for people, or just got to make sure that it works. And getting that out of the way so that when we actually have the course, we're able to focus entirely on the content that we're trying to create and the data we're trying to build, instead of having to deal with some pesky technology issues. And we'll also, during that pre-work time, have the opportunity to share videos and get you kind of primed for the information that we'll focus on during each course. And then, like I said, we'll have courses that are sequential, that go in order, as Chris was talking about, with each of those data layers, to introduce programmatic business intelligence in a series of sequential courses, where each course focuses on having an opportunity for hands-on experience in our software and being able to get you comfortable enough in about an hour or less with our software to be able to start building those programmatic data layers. And then at the end of course, you probably won't be done in just 1 hour of work. So there will be time in kind of our 2-hour courses with the last half hour or so dedicated to having a discussion on how to apply what we have just learned. So immediately we'll go from a learning section to a doing kind of hands-on experience. And then right after that, we'll talk about applying it from a larger perspective to look not only to track the work in what we'll call a coursework in a workbook, but also then be able to benefit from all of the different folks who are participating in the cohort and have that kind of brainstorming discussion and apply it, being able to benefit from hearing, we have Edmonton, Albuquerque, those are stark contrasts geographically, but there are certainly some similarities in the ability to learn from each other, as well as others who are on the call as well. So definitely the benefit of this is group knowledge from the perspective of participating in the cohort. Each course will include kind of an introduction, and then we'll talk about the curriculum or kind of data layer overview. Then, like I said, we'll go into a breakout session with hands-on training, where we'll spend time in our software, not only building the data layer, but also building that program insights that Chris talked about, which is really where we believe every program should be able to achieve is having that insight. And that's really where you kind of get your bang for your buck, so to speak. And then, like I said, we'll come back together, have some group discussion or reflection, benefit from being able to hear from everyone and reflect on how we can apply that into the future, capturing that application in our kind of post-webinar work that's in Google. So overall, we'll have a series of courses, like I said, that are kind of sequential, and they build on each other. So we have the first course over here in orange that's called PBBi Prep. This is essentially going to get us kind of all of the basics and build the foundational groundwork, if you will, for how to go through the subsequent data layers and ensure that this is a change or a methodological initiative that sticks in your organization, and you're able to ensure that it does actually grow some roots and make meaningful change in your organization. So that is what the focus of that PBB prep will be. And then we'll talk, again, just going down the list, building these data layers right on top of that groundwork prep course. So then we'll talk about program inventories, which are essentially the foundation for programmatic-based business intelligence, as the name might indicate. And then if there's interest going beyond building just your program inventory, but then of course having the option to add costs to those particular programs, that'll be the next sequential data layer, which we can talk more about in a minute here. And then on top of the costs, you can also add attributes, or if you want to, you can go straight from program inventory, not find out the cost of programs, but instead add those attributes as well. So you can kind of have a little bit of option as to which data layers and how many data layers you want to add. And then of course, with each of these sessions, we'll also have an open session available where you can just come and ask us anything. Sometimes some questions pop up in between each of the sessions that it's important to be able to have some time dedicated on the calendar to just come in, learn from others, ask those type odds and ends type questions during that open session, and that would be what the purpose of that is. Again, though, just building on these sequential data layers. So I'll jump into a little bit more detail for each of these. The first is what we call PBBi Prep. So again, we can see here, it's really just about building, building the groundwork for programmatic-based business intelligence. So the agenda for the class will look like we're going to understand each of the phases in a little bit more detail. Each of those data layers essentially would be discussed, and then along with those, we can talk about the cultural impacts. Again, just ensuring that this type of methodological initiative does indeed last in your organization and make sense to all. Talking about not only the phases, but then how to ensure that from a personal perspective that it makes sense and that we're ensuring this change happens in an intentional and meaningful way. And that's also going to include establishing your why and creating a timeline for the data layers overall. So in terms of hands-on application, the course deliverables will ensure that you have what we call a project charter, that again goes back to building the why of what, why are you undergoing PBBi, and you'll be able to kind of go through in the hands-on session and then afterwards, if needed, to discuss why you are doing this, as well as then strategically craft a communications plan and go into even further detail to say, how am I going to communicate this to all of the stakeholders in my organization, especially those who may not be on this particular call for this PBBi prep course. And that's the purpose of that communications plan, again, just to be able to engage a lot of stakeholders, most especially those who aren't on the call. And then last but not least, it's pretty important to have a plan for how to execute things. So being able to buy into your own implementation schedule is very important, and you'll be able to establish the dates that you would like to implement on for each of the subsequent data layers. So that's what's talked about, and then the PBBi prep class. And in order to advance to the next data layer of program inventory, you would finish all of these course deliverables first. Assuming all of that gets done, then you again would jump into this program inventory class, where we would talk first about what programs are. So we would get a definition of programs and understand from a more detailed perspective what programs are as the foundation for our subsequent data layers. So the group of people working together to deliver goods or services is essentially the definition, but what does that mean? And we talk more about identifying and refining programs, being able to ensure that they're easy to understand and that they advance the narrative or the story of your organization or department overall. And so we would talk a lot about defining a program and identifying programs, but then also talk a little bit about what's not a program. Sometimes it's easy to go through a process of elimination to say, okay, this is a program, but this isn't. And of course, then after going through the conceptual version of that, we would have the opportunity again to jump into our tools and start actually building that program inventory as the foundation for PBBi. So the hands-on application and the course deliverables will be, building at least 10 programs and describing them, as well as introducing that concept, as Chris said, here at this stage for program insights, and be able to teach you how to apply somewhere between 3 and 5 insights to each program. To even from this level, start thinking about what the future of programs could be. Even, without any other data layers, you're able very easily to start thinking about the future, even just by looking at the program inventory. And then, of course, as you think about future data layers, what this course would require before advancing into subsequent courses for additional data layers would be to complete at least 10 programs with names and descriptions. So that would be essentially just building on the course deliverables and having those be complete before advancing to either costing or attributes or both. So the costing course will essentially discuss just the logistics of what it is that we are costing. So the concept would be, we're taking your line item and personnel data, and we are assigning those resources to programs. So essentially asking the question to say, how do our people spend their time and what programs do they support? And then from the line item perspective, discussing which particular line items, contracts or otherwise, that go to support programs. And we do all of this to understand the true cost of services, to be able to get at how our time is being spent, how our resources are being spent from a line item expenses, and also revenues if applicable. If we have some program revenues, we can start allocating those to understand the true cost of programs in that St. Albert example as Chris outlined. And we use some other examples as well. And of course, this class will include some kind of costing allocation tricks that we use in our particular software that can be outlined in the hands-on application session, where we would, of course, have the opportunity to go back and refine our program inventory. Usually, your program inventory feels great, and then you start costing and assigning cost to it, and you're like, oh, wait, there's a need for a little bit of change here, and that's completely natural, right? The program cost and program inventory refine each other and serve as 2 different data layers to ensure that you're getting to be able to tell your organizational story. So we have the opportunity to do that, and then allocate personnel time, as well as having practice allocating some line item expenses. And again, believing in the importance of insights, you would have the opportunity to add 3 to 5 insights in this data layer as well, with the understanding that each of these kind of hands-on application expectations would be met before moving on to another particular class session. So then the last data layer available to look at in the cohort session would be program attributes. And so what this would look like is essentially evaluating your programs for what ResourceX calls our 5 basic program attributes. Chris also talked a little bit about those as it relates to the demand on a program or the degree of mandate, as well as a few others that we would talk about in great detail in this class, where we could also review the definitions of a few attributes and then potentially introduce the concept of custom attributes as well. So essentially in this attribute session, what we're going to be doing is we're getting a realistic assessment of the services to say, okay, if we were to try to change the service, to what degree do we have the freedom to do that as it relates to the mandate of the program? Or is it realistic to assess, to try to decrease service levels when the demand for this program is increasing? So that's kind of how we're folding in another realistic snapshot through these attributes for our programmatic data, and asking important questions about programs overall. So the hands-on session for this particular cohort course is going to, of course, look at scoring these programs against the 5 basic program attributes, as well as introducing the concept of potentially refining those definitions to ensure they fit your organization. They're asking the questions or answering the questions rather that you want to know, instead of something that comes completely boilerplate, which of course you have from ResourceX. You also have the ability to customize that to what you need and ensure those definitions are meeting your organizational needs, as well as the opportunity to add 1 custom attribute as well. And then last but not least, our favorite data layer, the program insights. So you once again have the opportunity in this class to add at least 3 to 5 program insights as well. And so if you've been kind of adding these up, you'll have at least 12 to 15 program insights by the end of these 3 courses. Of course, 5 is not the maximum. You can get as many as you want. In fact, the more the merrier. But you would have at least at least 12 to 15 program insights at the end of this cohort to be able to take action. And of course, then at the end of this course, we would be all done from the cohort perspective, but we would encourage you highly to go over and score other programs if we only got to a few of them during the hands-on session, and also potentially have these program scores validated by experts. And we would talk through that in the particular course as well. But I want to spend some time, because it's our favorite data layer, talking about program insights and what this means. So as Chris said, you know, we've done this through the 3 to 5 year lens, and we can also do this through the 3 to 5 month lens. But essentially, each course would have the opportunity to add program insights and designate the future of the program, creating organizational intelligence, which is the whole purpose, to be able to use these programs as the platform for getting business intelligence and having conversations for change in the future. So we put a high emphasis on these program insights because it really is where you begin to start opening up the potential for action. And what we then do during each of the classes is have discussion questions, like I mentioned, at around half hour left or so for each of these classes. We would have discussion questions to be able to enforce, after you just created these program insights, what are the opportunities for action? And for example, for program inventory, one thing that we would want to know is a story you can tell for your organization based off of the programs that you've just created. Or for cost allocations, being able to have the discussion of the consequences of across the board budget cuts versus being able to use your program strategically. So these are the types of conversations that we'd want to have just after creating insights, data and insights, to be able to start looking toward what taking action on this data and using these insights mean. And we would talk about that as a group, again, to benefit from the group knowledge and the discussion overall. And, you know, with that said, the promise of the process is really kind of what we call a 3-part progression, if you will, where each cohort class will be focused on creating data, either program data or cost data or attribute data. And then we would go one step further to ensure that the course has the opportunity to add insights based off of that blueprint for action. But ultimately, that data and insights is all created for the purpose of taking action. So we would have the discussion questions for a potential course of action, and then also provide the opportunity to reflect and, of course, execute on how to do that after each cohort course is completed. So what this looks like too is the fact that we have this workbook that will be available to everyone. So you'll have the ability to reference back each data layer, the trainings and the slides, in case you have questions or in case you wanted to teach everyone else in your organization, for example. But then you also have the ability to reflect on some of the things that were said in the course and go back and fill this workbook out so that you can ensure that you're strategically supporting immediate action on the data and insights that you're creating. And this would all be captured in that workbook that would be available on Google. So that was a lot. I tend to have a lot of excitement and speak quickly as it relates to all things PBBi. But I'm going to take a quick breather here. Does anyone have any questions before I jump into what program or cohort options are available? And if something comes up later on, please feel free to stop me. But some greater detail, which will hopefully further contextualize the very rapid introduction to what the cohort looks like, is that we have 2 options available. First off, what we would call an organizational wide option, which would include a subscription for all classes that I just outlined for about 2 months of time, and we could have 3 users per organization per cohort. With the understanding that, you know, so our cohort classes, each class that I just went through, each data layer essentially is capped at 12 participants, just to ensure that we have the right ratio for everyone to be productive during those work hours. So each of those classes would be capped at 3 users per organization up to 12, but if we aren't full, then you can add additional users based off of that capacity. And from this organization-wide perspective, this option 1 perspective, there would be no limit on total users overall. So we can send, 3 users per class, all the way, if everyone in your organization wanted to do it, we could do that per cohort if that is an option that sounds intriguing to you. It's certainly an option. The only limit, again, would be on the number of folks per class. It is, again, at that 12 limit, but you can just come in the class after that if that's something that appeals to you. If, however, that sounds like it might be using a lot of folks in your organization's time, or you feel like you're in a position to focus specifically on this, and you can then go ahead and take our teachings and then go ahead and teach others in your organization without them going through this cohort process, option 2 might be a good place for you to be. And this option is going to include, again, that subscription for all classes for up to 2 months. You could come back to as many classes as you want for 2 months, but this would be 3 users per organization overall. And again, so the difference there is the fact that you would then be, you and 2 others in your organization would be doing this training for your organization without ResourceX, whereas if you wanted to send your whole organization or a subset of users greater than 3, maybe that organization-wide option is good for you. So usually the question that comes up at this slide is something related to, okay, well, if I wanted to be a super user only and do that option 2, which 3 users in my organization should I send? Great question. And we would suggest sending someone on your budget team usually, especially if you're going to get into that cost allocation data layer. It's great to have someone familiar with the budget to talk about the costs and the programs. Also your city manager, because or county manager, whomever the executive is in your organization, because we want this change to be something that is again lasting in your organization and methodologically makes sense from a global or big picture perspective. It makes sense to have that organizational executive bought into this process as well and serving as the leader or executive sponsor for this type of change initiative. And then one other person potentially good at project management or very familiar with the services offered from the organization or department in question. People who are just overall familiar with programs is another great eligible user for that option 2, super user perspective. So what this looks like from a timing perspective is three courses per week, essentially. On Tuesdays or Thursdays, we'll be alternating between PBBi prep and cost allocation. So one Tuesday, we would talk about PBBi prep, and then the subsequent week, we would talk about that cost allocation data layer. On Thursdays, we would be alternating between talking about the program inventory data layer and the program attributes data layer. So again, if you were to imagine going through this at as fast as possible speed, you could go on one Tuesday, PBBi prep, the following Thursday program inventory, the next Tuesday cost allocation, and the following Thursday program attributes, and your data would be built in 2 weeks. Assuming that you were able to complete each of those course deliverables in between the Wednesday or subsequent Tuesday in between each of those. And of course, you could come to any Friday session to ask any additional questions as it relates to costs, programs, attributes, any of the above. And that is exactly what that Friday session is meant to cover overall. So a different view of this with some more fun colors, because I can't get enough of all of the colors in the resource XX, would look just like this to be able to show exactly what I just outlined, to say, okay, I could come to PBBi prep on Tuesday, get through all of the charter implementation schedule and communications plan, and then show up on Thursday, start building our program inventory. On Friday, come and we can talk about how to upload your data during this open session, and then get you ready to go for the cost session on Tuesday. You can start doing your cost allocations, and then we can do your program attribute scoring right after that. Or if that seems a little fast, you can of course then go start out on this first Tuesday and then take a week to think about it and then come back. So these will just be rotating to fit into whatever implementation schedule you need, which is also why we'll have that implementation schedule filled out during this first session in that PBBi prep. So with that said, I want to ensure that we have some time to talk about pricing and some other logistics as well, but then, feel free to ask any additional questions. And our first cohort will start on June 9th at 10 a.m. Central. All our sessions will. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you've heard so far some information that is proven to be helpful for you to understand more about what programmatic-based business intelligence is. One of the things that should be clear from our perspective is that some of us have been practitioners on your side of the fence and understood some of the barriers that have been presented before to being able to do this methodology. And specifically, we've thought very long and hard about how to do that. And fortunately or unfortunately, we've taken the time during this pandemic to actually figure out how can we break those barriers down and deliver a product that's going to be very functional for everybody. So specifically, I want to talk about 4 main reasons why you'd want to join the cohort. First and foremost, we've learned that cohort learning is extremely powerful at building community. It's one thing to go and undertake this changed methodology of programmatic-based business intelligence on your own. But we have found through fiscal health cohorts that when you gather disparate organizations from different places in the country or even from Canada, that new communities and new ideas exchange happens, and that enriches the experience for all the organizations. Secondarily, one of the things that I know I wrestled with the 2 times that I implemented, my first implementation of priority-based budgeting in 2007 took over a year. Now, as you heard Chris talk and also from Jackie today, we've been able to help people within a matter of days, literally 4 days with Cleveland Heights, to come out with a significant amount of data as well as insights that are prepared for action. And so we believe now that the cohort will be able to deliver to you and your organizations data much more quickly, and it focuses your organizations very keenly on specifically the accomplishment of implementation. Number 3, this has been a barrier for a lot of our potential clients as well, and that's been the cost. Traditional on-site and traditional one-on-one implementation is expensive. Now, through the cohort, we're offering an opportunity for a decreased and less expensive option for you to consider. And then lastly but not least is this notion that the PBI cohort implementation helps to focus your organization on the long-term cultural and long-term viability issues of ensuring that your organization continues to keep that focus of being data-informed or data-driven through the use of the data that you've created. So we really want to help you with that cultural perspective. All right, so if you've understood what we've talked about thus far, now I want to spend a few minutes talking about the pricing. So on the left-hand side, we have cohort learning, and on the right-hand side, we have one-on-one, the typical traditional way of implementing priority-based or programmatic-based business intelligence or priority-based budgeting. So we've created it so that it is something that any organization can have an opportunity to dip their toe in the water, kick the tires, so to speak, peek in the windows and see, hey, is this for me? But also at the same time have some off-ramps. So if you're looking at the left-hand side of our slide here, and you're looking at the different modules, as Jackie explained, we have the 2 routes you can take. Number 1, where you get to take all of your departments for up to 2 months period of time. Those 3 users, maybe it's your exec sponsor, your project manager, and a department user or a super user. You can see that for as little as $15,000, you can get started. And if you wanted to implement program inventory, costing, and then scoring, you can implement for a total of $30,000, which is vastly different than what you see on the right-hand side with our traditional one-on-one implementations, which are significantly more expensive. And you can see that depending upon the organizational size. So we also have the option that you just want to send super users. And again, as Jackie explained, these are the folks that are going to be able to learn the methodology, go back into the organization and teach your peers and colleagues this particular methodology. And this particular method of implementation is extremely less expensive at $11,500 to allow you to implement all of those attributes, all of the functions of programmatic-based business intelligence as Jackie has described. So if you're not interested, now if we haven't piqued your interest, that's fine. Thank you for joining us today. But if you have further interest and you would like to join the cohort, it's as simple as just emailing us, emailing me. And we'll provide you with some contact information here shortly. But again, we want to make sure that if you have any questions about what we presented today, to now take the opportunity to ask those, and we can help you get some answers. So with that, any questions, anyone? And thanks, Chris, for popping the email in the chat box.
Joseph, if you raised your hand from Ferndale, please, can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, hi, I had to pop out there. So I apologize if you're gonna have to repeat some information, but I have a question generally. That 11.5 number, is that for the one-time implementation concerning this program, or what are the annual subscription fees after? Is that to be determined?
Great question, Joseph. So you're right. This 11,500 cost gives you the cohort learning for the 2-month period, as well as your software subscription for 1 year. So as it pertains to renewals, you know, there would be a renewal cost, but that renewal cost again would just be for your software usage as well as support in the ensuing years. And so does that answer the question, or you want to know what the cost was for that?
Well, and this can be a separate call, but just basically I wanted to have an idea of a conceptual idea of what the cost is 3 years out, right? So I get the 11.5 now, and that is great. That's attractive. But thinking about how sustainable that is moving forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, understood.
Joseph, you're right. So the renewal approach that we have often consists of a discussion around, are there any additional services that we would provide you in a year 2 or a year 3, building back upon this base cost again. So that we have this foundational cost here. So if you went down this path, $10,000, 11,500 for all of the learnings and the trainings. The question in a renewal year would simply be, hey, Joseph, it's 2021, you're up for renewal, you're back to your foundational level. Do you have any desire to have additional services? And we would scope those out kind of as needed. But the bare minimum would be 10,000 for a year 2. And then the question would be, are you coming to cohort classes? Are we doing any individual training? And that is negotiable.
Okay.
Great question. Does that answer? Are you good, Joseph?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. And we can continue as well offline just to have some total clarity and walk through some what ifs with you. That'd be fine. I saw Edward had his hand raised as well. Edward, can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, quick question, and you may have addressed it, but this cohort style, is it really irrespective of price? Is it for all size organizations? You know, I think we're probably mid-size to large size, and I just want to make sure that you know, maybe a small organization might be more beneficial. So I'm just trying to, I don't want to sell ourselves short in this particular process. So is it, you're going to have a mix of folks, mix of organizations, but does it work well across all sizes?
Yeah, great question, Edward. And the answer to that question is yes. Again, during this time of the quarantine, we've actually been doing a lot of experiments with organizations of disparate sizes, from very small organizations to extremely large, over multiple billion-dollar budgets. And we found that the cohort learning has been extremely powerful for large, medium, and small organizations. Now, let's just say that Riverside's decided, you know, cohort sounds great, but we would prefer to have the one-on-one implementation. That's still on the table. We would definitely still be open to it, but we're just trying to, again, offer a more rapid as well as less expensive option for those that want to go down that path.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Edward, the things that you might want to consider, if I was in your shoes, one might be, how soon do you need to get your data put together and get everybody trained up and building their inventory, their costs, their scores. And the appeal of a one-on-one is, yes, it's more expensive, but that's because we're dedicating our staff 100% to you, your timing needs, your calendar, and you're in control. I mean, clearly we'd have to negotiate if there's nobody available for a particular training. We'd have standard, reasonable calendar coordination along the way. But if that was the case, and you need to drive it, and it has to go along your calendar path, then a one-on-one is appropriate. The appeal of the cohort is, even with a large organization, we're teaching the same classes. It's just trying to get your team onboarded as fast as you could. And if you can go with this, which still gets you data quickly, then you fall into our classes. You're pushing your teammates to join and get the training as they can. There's a rolling schedule to try to provide multiple opportunities, so you can still get through this really quickly. But you're conforming to our class schedule and enrolling there, but you also share in the economy of scale and the group learning. So those are the kind of things that you might weigh back and forth.
Yeah, you know, I committed to the PBB process with our council last year, late last year, and I guess what I'm trying to balance out now is, you know, we want to go through this process, but I don't want to rush through it, and I don't know if maybe the cohort style, you know, obviously with COVID-19, everything is more critical, and doing these things are more critical in a timely manner, but I still want to make sure that we don't miss things, and we do it methodically with well thought intention as we go through the process. And I'm just trying to gauge whether the cohort style is the fast and furious process, and maybe things might fall through the cracks, versus the one-on-one, which I might be leaning more towards, just to make sure that we cover all the areas that I want to make sure are covered, and we don't miss any stone is not left unturned through this process. So I'm just trying to gauge that.
Totally good things to consider. My only comment would be on the data falling through the cracks. That is, I would want you to have confidence that even in cohort style, over unlimited training with 2 months of classes that you'd be subscribing to, and you can always subscribe to more, I would have less concern about, I like the term fast and furious, but it's not meant to be fast and furious without any consideration of quality. Part of the reason we have capped classes and unlimited training is to make sure you're going to get quality data that you can take action on. I would have confidence in both processes for sure, for the quality of data and the action you can take. But I hear what you're saying as well. If you're leaning towards one-on-one because we're working directly with your team, you can spread out that calendar. You don't necessarily need to go through 2 months of intense training to get data as soon as possible. You can spread it out. I think your fiscal year is July 1, if I'm not mistaken. Before you need to make budget decisions again, then that's totally appropriate too. And that's why Eric was saying, if this appeals to you on the one-on-one side, it's a totally good option.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I still have to decide, and I think, you know, I think either way probably is beneficial. I just need to figure out how it suits us. So thank you.
And Edward, if you want to connect offline, I'm happy to. I know we've been talking a lot with Christy. I believe I even spoke to your city manager last year, but yeah, happy to help provide pros and cons to help with that.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you.
Joseph, your hand's up, but I wasn't sure if that was your old hand or if it's a new hand. Oh man, I can't see the gentleman's name. I can't access your name top left, but you came to our prep course from Edmonton, I believe.
So it's Harm from the city of Edmonton.
Yes, all right. I
Yeah.
your name.
Great presentation. I think I'm kind of in the same question as Edward. We were at council just a couple of days ago, actually. So we kind of did our first round of budget cuts with COVID at the end of April, and we were there with some updates just a couple of days ago. And ironically, the first question they asked us is, "How's your PBB process going?" Because that could help us with some of our decision making. And so Bonnie, I think she's offline right now, but we looked at each other and we said, we wish we had PBB in place right now to help with some of this. So this was really appealing when we saw this cohort style thing that you guys are rolling out here. So I was interested to see what this would look like. Just the way things are happening right now, they're happening really quick. Quick decisions are being made based on the best available data we have in place. But I also know it's really hard to gather people to make effective decisions right now. And so that was one of my things I was wondering with the cohort style is I guess we'd be medium to large based organization, I guess. Just even some of this attribute scoring and just costing out these things. I know we've done some costing, but we still have to check in with a lot of people and a lot of some committees across the organization. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that and how that could play out with a cohort style maybe.
I'll chime in with a few initial comments, and then Jackie or Eric, your insights would be welcome here too. One of the appealing things I find about cohort style is that we are offering so many classes. Let me go back to that calendar that Jackie was showing, this being like a typical month with a program inventory and a program costing and a program attribute, that your departments don't need to all gather at the same time to go through inventory, that they can just onboard when they have the opportunity to do so. And so it's kind of a rolling schedule. You can even prioritize which departments you really hope to get going sooner than later, maybe some of your bigger departments or not, or maybe some of your smaller departments. City of Denver, as an example, did their first 6 largest departments to get through their program inventory initiative. And now they're considering Department 7 and beyond across the organization. But to me, that is an attraction of the cohort style. It's not like you have to do 2 separate implementations for different parts of the organization. You can just onboard as people have the time and they're ready for it. I think that could be good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's a tricky decision, that's for sure. Okay, thank you.
Sure. And
I would just add what Chris said. This is really modular from the standpoint that it allows you to add folks as you need. So if your organization in Edmonton is still in an emergency operations center type mode where people just can't get focused, then perhaps there are other entities within the city that you could implement, and the methodology is not going to change. They would just be leaders, tip of the spear, and still would be able to provide your organization with valuable insights that lead to action, but also a cultural shift, if you will, with now talking about programmatic data that could be helpful for sharing with other entities when they are ready to come on board. But you're right, it is tough. I put myself in your shoes now and see that, man, we want to do this, but what's the best option? And just like I said with Edward, if you need to bounce some other ideas, we're happy to talk about how that might look.
Great. Edward, is that a new hand or old hand?
Yeah, that's the original one, sorry.
Original hand, no problem. It's like truly being in a class and just having your hand up permanently in virtual setting. Well, I put Eric Keck's info in the chat. It's ecac@resourcex.net. I'm C. Fabian at resourcex.net. I think you have our emails as well. And we'll follow up again with the slides and the recording to this session and talk about some options that you might have if you want to explore, or email us and say, here's the two options that you're thinking about. And we can kind of go from there. But just wanted to say thank you so much for being open and participating today. We truly have been trying to come up with the best types of innovations that we could, not to have a one-size-fits-all for every organization. And that's what prompted this. Is we know organizations are, like you said, the decision-making is happening continually. The situation is evolving all the time. And so we felt that it was our obligation to make sure that you have all of your options open as it pertains to getting your data as soon as you could and being able to act on it as soon as you could while meeting your price needs. And that's why we felt that it was imperative to create this path. And so thanks again, and we hope just to be in touch and help you answer the remaining questions that you might have as you move forward in your decision making. All right, everybody. And if you have other staff that you want to send to this type of training, we'll have the recording, but we're also doing it again next Tuesday and Thursday. All right, take care, everyone.